Kelly. I work with Mercer here in Ireland, and I'm joined today by Celine, who's come over from Mercer in the UK, but has considerable experience in the Mercer world globally. And I suppose what we're really going to take you through today is, a way to actually interrogate your health and wellbeing programs and to work out, are they fit for purpose, and have they evolved in line with the changes to your workforce and the changes to the sort of wider world that we're in. So I suppose before we kick off, I'm going to get you all to exercise, but it will just only be in a hand-waving point of view, so no panic yet. How many of you would say that you have a really, really robust and well-defined health and wellbeing strategy that covers multiple years and is well communicated to your employees? Okay, no exercise yet. So my next question is, how many of you would say that you do have some sort of health and wellbeing program across your organisation? Exactly. So that's the whole issue. We all have these in place. We've done something, we've ticked some one of the boxes, but really, is it all integrated and is it really addressing the issues that you need to face? And I suppose the first question is, well, what is well-being? And is it, that you're relying on your Couch to 5K program, your few Pilates, you're referencing back to your EAP? So what are the kind of dimensions that you would look at? And ultimately, I have 8 dimensions we can refer to. We could probably throw in a few more than that as well. But I suppose for all of you here, I would again say, is there anything up on this slide that surprises you? You definitely expect to see physical, to see emotional or intellectual supports there. Financial has really come into its own in the last couple of years. But really it's all about the interconnectivity between all of these. Are people able to really reflect their true selves when they come to work? And for some people this will cover off on a broader range of issues of being able to be part of the community, having their spiritual representation reflected and represented in the workplace. So, there's really quite a lot of different areas that you need to look at and to consider how these are linked together. So then, having looked at the actual dimensions, I suppose the next question is, well, who are you doing your health and wellbeing for? So again, broad question. Who are you putting it in place for? I'm going to guess most of you will say employees, yes? But there's actually multiple stakeholders that really overlap in this area. In a lot of cases, we'd see that, say, some of the more traditional manufacturing companies might have come at this from a very strict occupational health or health and safety point of view. And obviously they can really help to drive that. Finance, both sides of the pennies, they will obviously, if you're spending a lot on your wellness programs, they'll have to cough up. But the trade-off then, it is to see what you're actually receiving in the way of reduced insurance premiums or indeed increased productivity that you're seeing from your wellness programs. Again, and we've heard it mentioned actually in the last session, in a lot of cases, some aspects of your wellness will be addressed by some of your employee resource groups, or indeed your charity committee. What are they doing around cancer awareness? And that will feed in. In the current world that we find ourselves in, where we're back almost at full employment, in that competition for talent, really employees are looking for organisations to actually be delivering on something that is providing a really tailored and properly thought through wellbeing program. Mercer carried out research from a global survey which showed that across all age profiles, about 50% of employees expect their workplaces to become much more focused on health and wellbeing within the next 2 years. The holy grail here is obviously if your health and wellbeing is fully embedded in your company DNA. If it is the case that you have that multi-year strategy, that you have buy-in from the top, and it's just the way it really works. So effectively, that's kind of what you are going to be looking for as part of this. So having defined what your wellbeing strategy, what your wellbeing dimensions are, and there's no right answer. We've heard of lots of different companies that have picked on a particular 4 or a particular 5 or 6, say. You then need to think, well, okay, how do we build this up to get our core components? What really are we delivering on when we look at employee wellbeing? So obviously you've got to have your wellbeing strategy, but it really should be tied with your business objectives. So what is it that you do on a day-to-day basis, and how is that going to be reflected by having employees that are engaged, that are able to bring their true selves to work, and that feel healthy and empowered to get all the supports that they need? Obviously it's going to be restricted or directed by the availability of various carers, and I suppose really for a lot of the research that we've done, having a supportive work environment, I wave my hands way too much to hold on to a handheld mic, apologies. having the supportive resources in place really will help. So in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily just enough to have all of these supports there. You really want to have community champions, to have workplace wellbeing supports, who really be able to drive that through as a message. Again, I suppose one of the dimensions that we touched on was having that cultural sensitivity, kind of understanding, well, how does this fit into the diverse workforce that we have and support their particular objectives. And really underpinning all of this, although I actually have a different thing underpinning, it is using the data that you're gathering to properly do some analytics on and work out what can make a difference here and what is actually moving the dial effectively in relation to our employees' health and well-being. Obviously, everything that you as an organisation are providing will be underpinned by what's provided by the public healthcare system. And I suppose the key point, we'll be touching on this in a couple of cases, is that this evolves. So effectively what was fit for purpose 2 or 3 years ago may no longer be the best solution for your workforce. So it should be kind of constantly re-evaluated. So, I guess then, where to begin? It would be very easy, I suppose, to jump into, okay, let's gather data, let's start analysing, let's get to that point very quickly. But the first point is, right, well, let's define the scope. Are you looking to analyse this for your organisation as a whole, for just one geography, for one department, and say, well, is there a learning there that we can expand out? And once you've defined that scope, then you say, right, well, what are our objectives? Are we looking to be best in class? Are we looking to check where we are relative to strategy? Are we looking to see, well, how is this evolving? Is this reflecting our diversity and inclusion agendas? And only once you have the two of those do you step into the data gathering. Once you have that, then it starts to be a great day for number crunchers, that you start to analyse that. In a lot of cases, though, it won't necessarily be that you have qualitative data for all of this. There'll be a certain amount of it that is quantitative. So, you know, some of the sense that people will give you from an employee survey. And those are things that you're sort of going to develop over time. So, you know, one of the things that you're doing then as part of that is obviously benchmarking it. But again, it's trying to define, well, what's the right thing to benchmark? Is it against our own objectives? Is it against other industry data? Or is it against sort of what's coming down the tracks? And then, I suppose, the main thing with this is you'll potentially end up with a list as long as your arm of actions that you need to do. So it's then about punching cloud. What are you going to do that will actually have a significant impact on your workforce, and that in some cases will just be an easy win? And then it allows you to come back to this as an iterative process. So, you know, you picked your first 3 key items, you fix those, you improve engagement, you work with employees across various areas, and then you come back to them in due course. So I suppose what we're going to go through now is 3 case studies, where we're looking at this, first of all, of how a global client looked at this across multiple sites, then bring it back to how a client here in Ireland looked at that against their own strategy. And then the third case, which is possibly a little bit more aspirational, is about a company that's really gone into the next steps in the sort of holistic view that they have of the health of their employees. Excuse me. So with that, I'll hand over to Smee.
Thank you. Okay, so first case study is, as Aisling was saying, we're going to start global. And keeping in mind the 6 steps that Aisling just walked through with us, I'll walk you through how an organization has taken this approach at a global level. So our first case study is a global engineering company based out of the US who had been doing well-being for at least about 10 years. So it was part of the DNA. It was something that had been communicated across the world that a lot of the local countries were really empowered to start to bring, to bring to life at the local level. And they came to us basically say a few things. We're 10 years into this well-being journey and we have a couple of questions. One, well, they had a lot of questions actually, but one, we don't know what we're doing across the world, and that's a challenge for us. 2, we're ready to take it a step further in terms of understanding what is some of the best practice that exists around the world and really looking to share that across our different sites around the world. And then 3, they're asking themselves, as a global organization, should we be thinking about a global minimum? So is there a minimum that as an organization we want to be aiming for when we're looking at well-being? So again, this is organization, they have been doing this for about 10 years, and they have very well defined what were the 4 dimensions dimensions of well-being. It might be interesting because they had actually started really focused on physical well-being 10 years ago. And then after a while, they added emotional well-being or mental well-being into the mix. And much more recently, financial well-being and social well-being, I guess, rounded up the 4 different dimensions of well-being. So we started with the problem statement, which was understanding what we have, building that global minimum standard, and making sure that our programs are really reflecting those 4 pillars. So step number 3, if you go to that approach slide, or if you think back through that approach slide that Aisling showed, was really looking at gathering data. So this organization is in about 45 countries around the world, and that's a lot. So we actually said, let's just focus on 18 key markets. And we worked with the organization including Ireland, and we worked with the organization to, 1, focus on markets that have been doing this for a long time. This is a US-based multinational, so US, Americas was very much in the mix. And then we also prioritized markets based on the noise. So the noise that was coming from employees and the noise that was coming from the businesses. And once we had that list of 18 countries, we actually asked ourselves, what is the data that exists? And that's a key topic that comes up every time when I go to these type of conferences. Data is such a hot topic, and it's a hot topic because it's a topic that matters, and also because you are sitting as an organization on a ton of information. So they wanted to understand what are the well-being programs that we have, what are engagement surveys saying, and sometimes you're not always asking, how are our well-being programs doing? You're asking different types of questions about how employees feel at work. So pulling out some of that data. Stakeholder feedback, I'll get back to that point, but I think is extremely important because if you want well-being to be really successful within your organization, it has to be something that the business and the line managers really believe in, that they believe that it's making an impact, not because it's just the right thing to do, but it's because it's also the right thing to do for your business. We pulled out health data, EAP data, so the prior session talked about some of the great utilization information that can come out of it, and then also looking at public data. So once we had all of that data gathered, step 4 is analyze the information. So I wanted to show you here a little bit of a sample of the data that came out of the stakeholder analysis. And if you go back to the title of our session, or the title of our session is your well-being program fit for purpose? And I think this shows really well that well-being programs in terms of the business objectives that they're trying to address actually vary a lot within an organization by location, and even within a country by, I think the JSK presenter earlier was herself, she was sharing that within Ireland across the different sites, a lot of different, I guess, feedback and objectives to meet across locations. So I think what was interesting from this stakeholder feedback, we actually did interviews. We did interviews with line managers, we did interviews with managing directors, across these 18 markets, and we asked them what's important for you. Key themes that came out globally were really well-being for us is about attracting and retaining talent. But also, well-being is hugely important for our clients. So if we want to attract these clients, this also needs to be important, and this needs to be reflected within our business values. And then in terms of other global themes, mental health is huge. It's huge today. It's huge on a global basis. But what I thought was quite interesting is, as an organization, we want to be recognized by our employees as having a culture that cares about employees. And then what you see across, although the map is not so clear, but what you see here is actually the differences that came out within their own organization across different regions was actually quite glaring. So if you look at the Americas, the focus was actually a lot on financial well-being. So, retirement savings, healthcare savings, savings towards for college. It's actually very important in that particular market. When we moved across to Europe and Africa, what they were focused on was actually, it's just access to care. We're not even at the piece around, financial well-being is less of something of importance for us, and it's more about just providing access to basic prevention care. If you moved up to Europe, actually, the piece around diversity, as well as the piece around absence, again, came out loud and clear in terms of these are some of the business problems that we're trying to solve through well-being. And then if you shift over to Asia Pac, diversity, so how do we create well-being programs that are very supportive of our diversity goals around gender or around LGBTQA benefit programs. And then if you look down to Australia, it was around communication. So what came out of the Asia Pacific or the Australia, New Zealand, Pacific region was actually we have all these great programs, but we struggle on how to communicate to engage with our employees to create that culture of caring. So I think the overall message here to take from this is fit for purpose is very important. And fit for purpose is about the organization, but also within the organization across the different regions. So this was very helpful in helping us prioritize, because the next couple of steps later on is around prioritizing interventions. So once we had done our analysis of the information, it's really around benchmarking. So what I'm showing you here is just a very quick snapshot. I'm not expecting you to read every single bullet that you see here, but essentially we did this gap analysis across the 4 dimensions of well-beings, and we also did this gap analysis by thinking about type of interventions. So you can have well-being interventions that are really all around education and risk identification, because if you think about it, that always has to be your baseline that you're working towards. Then we were thinking about programs that really impact behavior changes. For me, well-being is about changing behaviors within the organization, as well as changing individual behaviors. And then we also looked at the type of intervention that this particular organization had from a workplace environment perspective. So again, we carried out a benchmark across kind of different type of intervention. And when we were benchmarking, we were looking, if you go back to my initial context setting, we were thinking about what are some of the best practices that are coming out of different markets that we could potentially pluck from, China and bring to France, for example. So we were looking at internal best practice, and then we were also looking at gaps that were existing against what competitors were doing, and also what competitors were thinking about doing. Because I think that's, well-being is such an interesting space right now. It's changing all the time. So being able to understand how you benchmark against kind of future practice is really quite important. So what came out of this was, as Ashley was saying, we essentially came out with a whole list of potential interventions across each of the 4 pillars, across each of the type of interventions. So my 4 pillars are around physical, mental, financial, and social. And then it's in terms of type of intervention, so education, behavior change, or workplace environment. And we looked at it from 2 perspectives. We looked at it, well, actually 3. We looked at it globally, regionally, and locally. So it's a bit of a matrix that we're working towards. Now, what that helps us do, and this is the global view of it, is essentially, and this particular client was thinking about how to prioritize based on the level of effort, because they were, in terms of resources that they had, a little bit challenged from both the global, regional, and local perspective. And then they were looking at the return on value, and they were thinking about value in terms of not just the financial savings that can come out of having a really thorough well-being strategy, but they were also thinking about that value that they could bring to the business. So these are some of the results that came out from, in terms of priorities for the emotional well-being pillar on a global perspective. And by essentially kind of plotting the different interventions across these 2 axes, they were able to say, okay, for this year, this was actually done end of 2017. So for 2018, what we want to focus on a global basis is we have limited resources, we have limited budget, and we're seeing some really good things that are coming out of different markets around leveraging our EAP and some of our other vendors that we have on the ground to support mental health education. So for them, it was actually, this is the basics that we need to address, on a global basis, and we have the resources on the ground to do this. So it was high return, low effort, something that was easy to do. So that's the first red ball that you see with the dark lining. The second piece was around flexible and agile schedules. So going back to the whole culture of caring, the workforce was changing quite significantly. Also, a lot of, a bit more effort was something that they wanted to focus more on a global perspective in terms of looking at flexible, agile working schedule and adapting all of their policies to reflect that. And the last priority that they put for themselves, they had 3 per dimension, was around mental health digital support. So they are also an organization that really wants to embrace innovation, that want to embrace and wanted to also pilot a little bit some of the new digital apps, and there's tons of stuff, or there's tons of mental health apps out there. They wanted to pilot the whole digital model around mental well-being. So that's something that they knew was going to be a little bit more work, but also something they wanted to pilot if they were able to be successful around this for mental health, wanted to look at it across some different areas. So we're actually talking to them now about sleep apps, and then also, which is also a big topic that has come out in the conference so far, and then also looking at potentially piloting diabetes management digital apps. So again, this was, at the end of the day, this is how we prioritize what we're doing for 2018, but this is also an exercise that we go through, that they go through themselves now on an annual basis to figure out what are they focusing their attention on for the following year. So this is how we built, or we helped them build a Fit for Purpose program on a global basis, and then I'll pass back on to Aisling, who will come back home to Ireland to show case study number 2.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so this second case study was actually it was a really interesting case. It was an Irish employer, where they really had been doing a massive amount, and they actually had put in place a program that really was fit for purpose, but it had been a number of years ago. So what they really wanted to do was to test the waters, to see, is this still the case? They were actually one of those employers that had a multi-year strategy, and we're now starting to develop one for the next 3 to 5 years. So really wanted to see, okay, where are we going from with this? So I suppose for them we took a fairly similar approach of, let's look at your data. Let's, I suppose, in particular look at the interactions, because for them they had a lot of challenges around the type of workforce they had. It had a lot of evolutions in the company itself over the last few years. So there were sort of different pockets of employees that they needed to pay attention to the type of work they did, and really to their age profile. So we carried out that gap analysis, and I suppose the key issue here in relation to some of the analysis that we were carrying out was looking at the programs that they had across those 3 key areas and saying, right, it's all well and good to have education sessions and people can find out, okay, well, how do I find out, the information is there for me to access various courses, but if that's not really being supported in the day-to-day about what your workplace is about, or in actually being given programs to enable you to change, then it is going to fall down a little bit, no matter what education you're putting together. So ultimately then, for them, what we emerged with was a structure that kind of was going to help them to optimise the plans that they had, which were really fairly significant, and to identify some of those easy wins that they could look at. And I suppose some of the challenges that they had were around the engagement. They had just an awful lot of benefits available for people, but there was just that challenge that if somebody came in on Monday morning and thought, right, I have a problem, I think it's with my mental health, I think it's with sleep, I think it's with my physical activity levels, there was nearly too much information and no guidance for them on where to go to. So again, similar to Celine's slide, I'm not expecting anybody, certainly not the people in the back, to be able to read all of this. But effectively what we asked them to do was to go through their entire range of programs and say, and have that rigor to say, right, well, where would you place this against your pillars? Where would you place that against whether it's an actual, just an information or education piece? Is it a workplace modification? Or is it a behaviour change program? And a lot of these, they were able to take off so many of these that they had as standard, and many of your organisations would be as well. But it was really how is that kind of embraced throughout our wellness umbrella, and how are we reinforcing that as our message? And then there were some other areas where, again, you were just going to have to accept, I suppose, the challenges around geography, around the number of people in a particular site meant that, yeah, maybe you weren't going to be able to have a meditation room everywhere, but at least you put it back on the agenda and you're raising that as an issue. So I suppose really, ultimately, and actually it was a great challenge to have. It was there was one element where we were going, well, this is a good news story, in that they had a wide range of programs available for employees. But actually the issue for them was about empowering employees to make the right decisions, to be able to take those little individual steps of where do I need to go to. And then from an employer perspective, what they were really missing out on was a lot of the analytics. They had this strategy, they had taken a great deal of thought and time into it, but really when you looked at some of the underlying data that they were gathering, be it screenings, be it pre-employment medicals, this was all just sitting in little repositories. And similarly, their health and safety structure didn't really speak to the wellness team in terms of kind of going, well, how do we change these issues? So effectively, I suppose what for them, this carrying out this review allowed them to be comfortable with what they were offering, to help them evolve, to cover some of the emerging trends around, say, making sure that it tied in with their diversity and inclusion agenda. But also the recommendation was nearly to rein back some of the programs that they had and instead provide pathways for people to be able to access it themselves. And effectively then, that they would be able to use, if they tap into the data that's available, they'd be able to use that to review their wellbeing strategy on an ongoing basis and make sure that it was addressing the changes, especially because their workforce is changing so much and expected to change an awful lot more in the next 5 to 10 years. So the health risks that they had faced in the past weren't going to be the same ones that they were facing in the future. So this really allowed them to get that sort of deeper look and to test, we're comfortable where it's going for the next 3 to 5 years. We'll continue to evaluate that on an ongoing basis. And I suppose the next step really for an organisation is in trying to say, well, how do you go further than that? So for that, I'm going to pass back to Celine to look at the next step.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this one, as Ashley said, is another case study, but it's I guess the natural evolution following case study 2 is where do you go from this? How do you create what I like to call more of a healthcare ecosystem or well-being center within an organization? So I think the first thing I will say is this is a really good case study, but this is also a case study that we've been working with them for about 8 years now. So it's not, and I would also say, this is kind of my unicorn. I don't have a lot of these clients, but it's such a great story, and the client is so engaged. And we've been living and breathing well-being and wellness within the organization for a long time. So this is aspirational, and this is by no means, we work with a lot of clients, this is by no means the common approach. So this organization came to us. They have about 30,000 employees on site. So it's not an Irish-based organization. This is also not a US or UK-based organization. So this is not in probably more the more traditional well-being centers of the world. And they came with us with a kind of a number of issues. Number one, they said we have all of these programs that we're offering that are great, but they're actually quite complex to administer. We have a lot of different stakeholders. So the principal buyers were the medical team, but they also had, the medical team also had occupational health and safety, but they had the benefits team, they had finance, and they had the business. And this was a BPO shared services organization. They said, oh, we have all these great programs, we don't speak to each other, and we have data, but we don't quite know, we don't have the right infrastructure to bring it together. And they have multiple vendors as well. So in terms of challenges that they came to us is they knew, instinctively they knew we have the right basics to be building something really great out of this, and there's a lot of appetite at the organizational level to really kind of take it a step further. So they said to us, what we would like to do is a number of things. One, we would like one single piece of technology to bring together all of this data that sits in our HR system, this data that sits with our insurance health carrier, the data that sits with our EAP carrier. We would like a single platform to aggregate all of this, because the reality is for our business, we're not going to move all of the different programs to a single vendor. We want to have a technology to bring it together. They also said to us, because they're a BPO shared services organization, they said to us, actually a big issue for us is managing absence. And right now, that was actually a big gap for them. They were not actually tracking who was going on leave and why. And if you're in a BPO industry, if somebody leaves or somebody has to call in sick that morning, the manager has to find somebody else to replace him or her to come in that day, and not always easy. So if you don't have somebody that comes in, actually this directly impacts the bottom line for the business. So they were saying to us, from an absence perspective, we feel as if there's a gap in terms of tracking. We don't know where it should sit within the organization. And also, as an organization, they had pre-employment health checkups that were mandatory and annual health checkups that they were providing on an ongoing basis. So again, going back to the basics, they knew we have all of the right programs, we have the infrastructure to actually make this something really wonderful. So the other piece as well that I forgot to mention, but that's actually quite key to the approach that we put together for them, is they had an on-site health clinic. So that means they had, for all of their offices, all of their locations, they actually had a medical clinic on site, because actually it was required from a health and safety perspective. So they said to us, and again, we have that on-site clinic. So what do we do? And this is, again, has been something that this is an engagement that we've had with them for about 8 years now. So what we did is we said, okay, let's turn your on-site clinic, because it's infrastructure, it's resources that you have on the ground. Employees engaged with the clinic. I think it was like almost 85% of the employees have used the on-site clinic. So let's turn that into your wellbeing center. And also because that was where a lot of the resources were sitting. So let's turn this on-site clinic into your wellbeing center and into the single point of entry for an employee who has an issue around medical leave, who wants to get the results for their health screenings, who wants to get maybe some referral into the private healthcare system. Let's also turn this on-site clinic as a hub to deliver a lot of your well-being initiatives. So again, this is not something that we did overnight, this is something that we did 8 years, and then let's use this on-site clinic as that data repository. So we actually, because the market there did not have a single technology to bring all of that data together, we said we'll have to go out and select a vendor who can build this for you. And we now have a vendor who has built that for them, and who is now selling it for a lot of other clients, and we didn't get a referral fee for that, but that's a separate discussion altogether. We also said, because you have this mandatory health screening process, let's automate it. Let's automate it, and let's work with your vendor to get some aggregate health screening data that comes out on an aggregate basis. So we were able to actually say, for this particular location, for this particular unit, sometimes as well for this particular manager, or maybe not a line manager, but maybe like 1 or 2 levels up, can we get some of the data on an aggregate basis for them? So what are the key health risk factors for the new people, the new hires that they are bringing into the organization, and what happens to them on an annual basis? Because remember, they have annual health screenings that they offer on a mandatory basis. And then from that, actually, we were able to basically build a baseline. So we have an initial baseline that we're able to measure year over year. We have this on-site health clinic, which is now becoming this well-being hub, which is a gatekeeper into the insurance program, which is also managing. They have a nurse line that they built up to manage absences. You have to go out there and get your medical leave certificate if you're gone for more than X number of days. And they also do return to work assessment. And we also work with the on-site well-being hub to push out targeted intervention, because once you have all of this great data, they were able to say to us a number of things. One, gender diversity is a very big deal for us, and we see a lot of maternity cases that are coming that we see a lot of difficult pregnancies, and we see return to work for our women employees being actually quite difficult. So let's use this on-site clinic to deliver maternity care management. And also let's use this on-site clinic to deliver nutritional advice. So over the years, this on-site wellbeing center has really been used to push out, and again, is essentially in the employee's mind a single point of entry into the organization's health ecosystem, if you want. And they also did a lot of work around branding and communication, because again, you can have the best program, but if nobody knows about them, if it doesn't have a unique brand, then it just will fall flat. So in terms of the findings or the results that have come out of this is why I say it's my unicorn, because the results are pretty good. So a few things. We were able to shift a lot of the care towards on-site and towards preferred providers. So they're not delivering everything on-site, they're also passing on to different providers within each of the different cities. we were able to see actually a reduction in the insurance health claim of 16.6% after year one. Cost avoidance. In terms of members who were engaging in at least one well-being activity, we have a number of 43% of employees actually engaging in voluntary well-being activities, so not your mandatory health screening, because otherwise 42% is kind of bad. And then in terms of sick day reduction, we found a 1 day reduction in the sick days. Now that, I would say, is fantastic, but it's also, you have to think back about the business, BPO, and also, again, the initial tracking that we had was probably quite subpar. And then as well, we managed to get all of the vendors to provide the data on a monthly basis into that technology platform that we built for them. So 100% compliance from vendors feeding in that data into the system. So we're 8 years past all of this, or 8 years since we first had that first conversation with them. And then now they're actually on a self-sufficient level, so they're actually getting a lot of the data, and they're using this to kind of constantly go back and readjust the well-being programs, and also use this for each of the sites to help drive what the strategy and the priorities will be. And they actually think about their strategies on a quarterly basis. They're not setting their strategy on an annual basis. They're kind of almost constantly doing this. So as I said, this is hopefully gives you an idea of what you can do once you have that well-being strategy defined, when you've done your audit, once you're starting to fit it for purpose, and then in terms of the ecosystem that you can build. So then to close, we wanted to leave you with a couple of key questions to ask yourself. Because we've given you three case studies that hopefully are different and different but similar enough. But in terms of what you should be asking yourself. So first things first, how well defined is your strategy? What are the dimensions that are important? Why are they important for you? And also, what are some of the programs that underpin each of these pillars? And to be fair as well, you can have a single program that underpins more than one pillar. So that's also something to make sure that you're defining. Number two, how do your programs compare? So if we've had a number of conversations, you will often hear me say, actually what's much more important is your well-being strategy supporting your own business objectives. When you benchmark, you should always benchmark against your own objectives. Then look at what your competitors are doing, which depending on the industry sometimes is not a huge amount. And then also look at best practice. And best practice, as I said, is constantly changing. So this is a fantastic space to be in because it's so dynamic, but it's also something to just make sure that you're talking to a lot of your peers. I think we have networking hour after that. So understanding who is doing what that's a little bit different, might be innovative and have some good results. So when you're benchmarking, think about those three aspects. And then last but not least, what impact do you want your wellness initiatives to have within your organization, for your employees? What are some of the metrics that you want to use? So hard metrics as well as soft metrics, the engagement that you want to drive. So want to leave you with these questions because if you know the answer to all of these questions, then I'm sorry. And if you don't, actually it does help you prioritize in terms of where to shift your energy.